Two different things might happen to technically food waste in this house. The first one is this. This is the compost pot. This contains vegetable trimmings, eggshells, coffee grounds. We don't put cooked meat or kind of meal remnants in here, except in this case we've got a few cooked vegetables in there because that doesn't really matter too much. Don't actually put cooked food in the garden compost because of the whole thing about rats. Rats are everywhere anyway, but I don't really want to encourage them to develop a colony under the shed or anything like that. I've seen a really good documentary about that. This one. Anyway, so yeah, uncooked vegetables, cooked vegetables, vegetable trimmings, coffee grounds, eggshells, tea bags go in here. Why not straight into the compost bin in the garden? Well, I'll show you that bit in a minute. The other thing that is technically food is out here in the utility room. We've got the municipal food waste bin. There's a little bit of rice in there at the moment that didn't get used. We've got a cold cooked rice that unfortunately I left it in the fridge too long and it's needed throwing out. So food waste that gets collected weekly by the council. That goes off to their big digester where it produces biogas and soil conditioner. This thing though goes out in the compost bin.
I carried her up the road.
Oh, Eva.
Past the second gate and she had to walk back.
Oh, you just don't like the weather, do you?
No.
It's the compost. Nothing in there for you. Right, so this is the reason why the compost goes in this container, is that it's a little bit of a trek out to the compost bin. So we've got two of these kind of Dalek type compost bins. This is the one that's being filled at the moment, and so that lot just goes in there. And then we'll take that back indoors and rinse it out or something. This is the large compost bin, which was, you might have seen that in a previous video. I made it out of two modular compost bins that I kind of figured out how to put together into a big circle, into a big ring rather than two square Daleks. We've taken the bin off of the outside of the stack and left the stack in place and covered it with this tarp. The tarp, in turn, comes from this old derelict woodshed. The tarp was covering this woodshed up. It was like that when we moved in. Not quite a fixer-upper, I would say, this shed. I think that probably just needs to be demolished at some point fairly soon. And because since building these steps, it's not so easy to get a wheelbarrow up this slope now, we've decided to move the big compost bin up to the top. So the big compost bin's in the upstairs woods now, in here. So we've moved it up to here in the upstairs bit of woodland, next to this elder tree. That's the one I cut back really hard, by the way, I think in a previous video. And as you can see, it sprouted this spring and it's grown. That's all of this year's growth, these upright stems. And that will fruit next year. So this has got a lot of shredded stuff from the woods. We've been clearing the ivy and undergrowth around the trees to make sure it doesn't race up the trees. All of that gets shredded and goes in here. And it is pieces of ivy that technically probably could grow, but we will just keep on piling it on, and eventually it will heat up and it will kill off all of the little bits of ivy in there. That will rot down, and then that's easy enough to transport back out this way to the upstairs greenhouse and vegetable garden. So that's the plan. We've already got compost on this one, and I buried some logs in this one. So that's the compost situation. We ought to just check in on these are the red currants and black currant bushes I planted. This one's a red currant. Those three are black currants. I can see I've got a wild arum coming up there. I think we'll just probably let that be though. I can see some little buds on these currant bushes, and we've had some good rain lately, so I haven't had to water these in at all, apart from when I initially planted them. So that was the compost situation. We've also got this huge stack of logs. This was left here in a big pile, where the raspberries now are. The raspberries have lost all their leaves, but the canes are looking okay. So we moved it over here. These are too rotten to use as firewood. Unfortunately, they were left uncovered, and by the time we actually moved into the house, they were too far gone. So we're just going to let these rot down here. They are at a point now where they could probably be shredded up to make mulch, and I might do that with some of them. I might sort of split them up with the axe, feed them through the shredder, make some mulch to go on the vegetable garden, because they're so rotten down, they're so well decomposed now that their further decomposition won't steal nutrients from the soil. The fungi are super busy in here breaking this all down, and so smash this up and put it on the garden and it will just break down, and the fungi and microorganisms living on it will actually probably feed the vegetable garden. So that's the compost situation anyway, and the kind of update of the upstairs garden a bit, or upstairs woodland rather. In the upstairs greenhouse I cleared away the tomato plants now, and I'm just thinking about what we're going to do next year. So, oh, there's my Lesia peppers, not looking very happy actually. I think I've probably lost that one. I was trying to overwinter that, but I haven't been watering up here, so that one's probably died. Anyway, tomato plants are cleared away. These tomato rings, I'm not sure how much use these really were, but interestingly these round ones have really faded in the sunlight, and this plastic looks like it's probably only going to last another year. The darker ones fared a little bit better, probably got some better UV stabilization stuff in the plastic there. But anyway, that's all cleared out now. This year I'm only going to grow tomatoes on the side furthest away from the sun. So I'm going to grow tomatoes on this side, let them grow up over. We're going to train them up over this cane here, maybe train them up over another cane here, and then let them trail back down the front so that we get a kind of curtain effect, because that was really productive last year. I was tempted to train them up and loop them over another cane here and loop them down that side so that we walk into a kind of arch of tomatoes. But I feel like, given the fairly low headroom in this greenhouse, that might just mean I can't even get in here. It might grow across the middle, and it might mean I can't get in here at all. The chains for growing tomatoes up last year, I don't think it was a terrible idea. It was very easy to tie into, because you can just tie a loop of string into the link of the chain. It won't slip down. That's marginally easier than tying onto a cane. It's fewer knots, but I don't think it was a particularly brilliant idea. It would have worked better if I'd cut those chains just a little bit longer and anchored them into the soil, because actually what tended to happen is, as the tomato plants got heavy, they still managed to pull the chain off to one side. So they didn't really just pull down on the thing. They grew up, flopped over a bit, and that tended to pull the chain off to one side. So I don't know. I probably will take that down and we'll revisit what we're going to do here. It is more convenient than canes, because those are difficult to get in under the sloped roof here, because you want to push it down straight down, but you can't get it in there if it's long enough to go down, if that makes sense. I suppose you could take the glass out and push it straight down then, but that's a bit of a faff. So I don't know, maybe we'll do some hybrid method of suspended canes tied onto another cane at ground level, maybe, to just keep the whole thing square, maybe like kind of like a suspended frame. I don't know, probably overthinking it. So it is freezing cold outside, but in here in the greenhouse it is 7.2 degrees Celsius, so the greenhouse does keep things a little bit warmer. But yeah, I think I've lost that pepper plant. I think I've still got some alive downstairs though. The Littlest watercress farm seems to be doing actually okay. I'm not sure whether we're going to continue this year. We did pick a fair bit of watercress from it, but I'm not really sure it was actually worth it. It was an interesting experiment, but I'm not sure it was actually really worth it overall. It was a bit of a faff, but we had some nice watercress from it, and obviously the plants are still very much alive. One thing quite a lot of people asked about these steps is, won't the slabs of stone here still be slippery? even though you've put them on the steps. Yes and no. When this was just crazy paving going all the way straight down the hill, it was impossible to go down on because the incline and the slipperiness of the stones just meant that your feet would just disappear from under you and you'd fall on your butt. So yes, they are slippery. So yeah, there's algae on there, and that is definitely a slippery stone. But because when you're walking down here, you're applying force perpendicular to the surface of the rock, it doesn't tend to slip so much. I mean, I think there is still a slip hazard here, and I may well still get the stone cutting disc out and cut some grooves across here or something like that, just for a little bit of extra grip, because yeah, it is slippery. I think if you tried to run up and down these stairs, you could slip. But yeah, guess what I'm not intending to do with these stairs? Run up and down them. A few people have asked recently, what's my workflow for editing videos and managing files and so on. None of this is a recommendation, of course. This is just the way my process has evolved. And I've just been out in the garden and recorded some footage on this GoPro of compost bins and things, which is elsewhere in this video. I can connect this GoPro wirelessly, but of course it needs charging through that port there, so it does need to do that every now and again. So once the GoPro's on, it will appear as a drive on here. Hopefully. Yeah, there we go. And then, so typically I'll just open that up, and then I've got a folder for each source as well as some other folders. So I've got a GoPro folder, I've got a left and right cameras at the studio desk over there, I've got my main camera, which is the one you're watching here, which is actually a smartphone, my Sony mirrorless vlogging camera thing. So anyway, we're going to put this in the GoPro folder, which has already got a load of stuff in it, and I'll move it. So I'll move it there. So yeah, also while we're waiting for this, each of these folders is a month, so I create a new folder every month, just really to keep things organised in some kind of timeline. So each month then has this set of GoPro, left, right, main, Sony, sometimes audio, sometimes if there's clips relating to a particular video, they will be in there as well, like a scan baiting video perhaps. As soon as I know I'm going to be making a video about something, I typically open a project for it on DaVinci Resolve. This is going to be the random 2025-02 video, the one you're watching. At the moment there's no clips in this one. I'll go back to that one there. So normally the thing people do is drag files into the media page. So you'd go to the media page and you'd import all your media. Then you'd go to the cut page and you'd cut all of your clips into pieces that you're going to assemble. Then you'd go to the edit page and assemble those things into a timeline. I don't do that, and I don't know if I'm maybe making things more difficult than they need to be, but so those are the files I've just recorded. And instead of dragging, you can drag them into the media pool here as well, up here in DaVinci Resolve, but I'm going to drag them straight onto the timeline. Reason being, that then groups them all together. I'm not going to change the frame rate because this is 50 frames per second footage that's coming here. Remember also now to turn off the GoPro, because if you don't turn it off, it doesn't charge, and actually all it does is sit there and overheat. And so I cooked the battery in my GoPro one time. I left it plugged in and connected so the thing was running, and it overheated and cooked the battery. Anyway, so now what I'll do, just to make sure I can identify those clips as being all part of one thing, is I'll just colour them. I'm just going to colour them orange. The next bunch of clips I bring in, I might colour them blue, something like that, so that I can recognise at a glance that all of that footage belongs together. Because over time, over the course of a month, I will record more bits of random stuff and drop them into this project, and they won't necessarily be dropped on the end of the timeline. What I may end up doing is inserting them at the start of the timeline or something like that. So, you know, I might put them here. I may split that up and put something in the middle if it's two different themes in this block of recording. But that's what I tend to do. So this project in DaVinci is not copies of the media, this is just references to the media. But dropping them into the project as soon as they're recorded means I don't have to go and find them later. And then for editing, I will just tend to play through, and when I get to a bit where I want to cut, I've got my little macro pad here, and so I would just cut and then find the bit I want to join up to there, for example, and then I've got a ripple cut there which just cuts it like that and deletes the bit in the middle. There's all sorts of functions here, like if I want to move that clip up I can just do that with on the macro pad. If I want to just delete the start of a clip, it's that one. If I want to undo, it's that one. So we can go through the undo stack there. If I want to insert a clip into the middle of something, so we'll go up here, pick that one. Suppose I want another copy of that clip inserted where the cursor is there, I can just do that, and it's inserted it there. Didn't actually want to do that though. So most of my commonly used functions, the other one that's really useful for me actually is delete gaps. So if you've got footage which is all gappy like this because you've been cutting pieces out of it or you've dropped in things together, that one in the middle there just deletes all the gaps. Okay, that's probably enough of the editing for now, but I might pick up a bit more of this later when I do some more editing. So this little cast iron pan, and it is cast iron by the way, some people commented to say that the instructions were weird because it says not to be used on induction, and some people thought maybe that means it's aluminium. It's not, because we can stick a magnet to it. But I think the thing about not using it on induction is just because it's too small. I think some induction stoves will not function properly unless the pan covers the ring completely. Because I know it's a problem with induction if you move the pan slightly off the ring, that sometimes causes them to stop working. Other people said maybe they're Teflon coated. I don't think they are. I think these just had a factory seasoning on them, probably just some oil burnt onto them. I think probably the temperature limitation of 250 Celsius is really more of a practical thing, just to stop you burning the seasoning off, because the seasoning will start to be destroyed if you put it in an oven at high temperatures. Anyway, I've been using this little one on top of the wood stove in the living room, just to make use of that heat of that fire to toast some nuts. So one thing this little pan is quite good for is roasting nuts. So I've got some pecans there, and we're going to roast them on top of the fire. They'll take about probably 3/4 of an hour. I'll give them a stir halfway through, and it's really good. They toast up nicely. Bit inconvenient that the pan is so shallow, but it does work. Anyway, this thing, really not much use. Let's just have another look at this, because I think I was waving this around a bit too much on camera on the other thing, and I don't think people actually quite got how unlike the pack shot it is. So there we go, that's the shape of the thing, and I hope you can see there, that is not the same shape. It's broader and flatter at the bottom end, well, all over really. It's more squat and squashed, so there's much more of a sort of, the legs come down more on the pack shot. The head is also rounder. This is this weird little square Lego man head. Somebody did say actually that it's a meeple pan, and that makes a lot of sense actually. It is a bit like a meeple, isn't it? I know some people who like games. Perhaps I will give this pan away to one of my gaming friends, and they can use it as a meeple pan. Anyway, I've been and gone and done it again. So I bought these two this year, and then I went back to the store. I said I wasn't going to buy any more, but further reduced. This one was down to £4 this time. Nutella brownie skillet. Now this one's a different brand, Market Lane Food. This is Culinary Creations, which is a bit of a joke considering that there wasn't really even a kit to make food in here. There was just a bag of sweetened flour. Anyway, this one's called Market Lane Food Company brownie skillet, and the reason I bought this one is it's different, or at least it appears to be different. So the key issue with this tiny pan is it's a little bit shallow. it's in perfect proportion. It looks like just a shrunk down regular cast iron skillet, but it's a bit shallow when it comes to being used that way. This one, it's all stuck in there. Yes, this one is a little bit deeper. Perhaps nearly twice as deep, maybe 1 3/4 times as deep as that one. And it's got some little pouring things as well. Shorter and not so elegant handle. The seasoning looks a little bit uneven, but that's really not a problem. I can deal with that. But I think that one might be slightly more useful. It's slightly larger as well, yes. This one looks like it might be just about the right size to bake a whole camembert in it. I think I'd probably still line it with parchment if I did that. There is a recipe kit in here, so you get a pack of brownie mix there and a little single serving portion of Nutella or Nutella. I'm not going to make this recipe. I'm not going to do this one. The Nutella comes from Italy, obviously. The brownie mix comes from China. Say what you will about that, I probably will not be eating this one. Completely different organisation making it, but very much the same idea, clearly. So we have got now 2 different little cast iron pans, each with their own virtues and failings, but I do think that's possibly a little bit more useful a pan in terms of it's just got a bit of depth. You can stir things in there, for example. Even with this little one, when I'm roasting nuts in it on the fire, I have to stir it really carefully because they will just flip over the edge. It's just so tiny and silly. I will find a way of using this pan, but it isn't going to be making this brownie mix. I will just open this up so we can have a look at the contents. So it's cocoa and flour and sugar. The actual ingredients are flour, sugar, brown sugar, cocoa powder, baking powder, stabilizer, cornstarch and salt. Well, that one does smell kind of stale, but in a remarkably different way to the other ones. How interesting. And it's not just the earthy smell of cocoa powder I'm smelling there. I'm trying to put my finger on it. Somebody did say, you said it stinks and then you kept on smelling it. Yeah, I was trying to figure out what it was. Have you ever found that you smell something, it's, oh, that's horrible, but then you have to go back and have another sniff just to figure out what it was. Yeah, this one's more of an artificial plasticky sort of aroma, so it might just be to do with the fact that it's been in this plastic packaging for longer than it maybe should. I'm not going to be making that brownie mix. That's going to go in the food waste bin. Yeah, so there we go. Right, today we're going to do a little bit of sorting out in the downstairs greenhouse here. So I've got to make decisions. I don't think I've managed to keep my Lesia pepper through the winter. It's just died. Probably I didn't water it enough or correctly. Same thing with my cayenne here. She's still got a few fruits hanging on it. However, I have managed to keep the one I really cared about, which is Capsicum flexuosum. These 3 plants here. So what I'm going to do is actually pot up one of these and take it indoors and grow it indoors. The other 2 I'll pot up and I'll keep them out here. There is also this Cape gooseberry, which has survived the winter and continued fruiting through the winter, albeit rather slowly. This I'm going to cut back and it will sprout again from the base. I'll leave about maybe 15 centimetres of stem. But I'm going to carry this upstairs and plant it in the border in the upstairs greenhouse, so it can grow in the natural soil in the greenhouse border. I'll have to remember to water it, but hopefully then we'll have this fruiting up in the upstairs greenhouse where it will get a bit more sunlight, a bit more room for the roots, hopefully a bit more fruit this year. But yeah, growing this now as a perennial instead of just the usual growing it as an annual. But yeah, just to show you, so this has been out here the whole winter. It's now February, and look at that, perfectly sound. They're protected from spoilage by that papery husk. Delicious, really juicy, kind of tastes a little bit like tangerines. So I cut these right down, but they will sprout again. from all these nodes here. Hopefully a more bushy, less leggy plant this time around. But yeah, my other leisure pepper, I'm afraid, obviously I'm the reason that died. Failed to keep that properly watered. So those bits can all go in there, in the big compost bin. The soil in this greenhouse border is actually really rather nice and rich now. I got a lot of compost on here last year and it's broken down nicely. I'm not going to add anything more to this soil this year, but we will obviously use liquid feed once we've got the Cape gooseberries established in here. I should think that'll be quite glad to spread its roots out. I'm not really sure how necessary this is, but I will just break those up again. Some people say it's necessary to do this to plants when you plant them out, and they say that the roots will get in the habit of just going round and round. I think it's actually more the case that breaking them up like this stimulates a bit of new root growth. It stimulates the plants to actually do something different. So we'll just break up the root ball a bit like that. Into the trench I've dug like that. And then earth it all up again. Anyway, something like that. And I don't know whether I'll keep these chains in place or not. I might use these for tying this up, or I might take this whole system down. But yeah, we'll just give that a good drink now. Not just the plants themselves, but we'll water the whole border and try and get a bit of moisture into the soil surrounding the root ball. And we'll see what happens if we grow Cape gooseberries as a perennial. They are like a lot of the plants that we grow as annual crops, like tomatoes and peppers and so on. They are short-lived perennials in their native environment. We just happen to grow them as annuals because that works well for cropping. As they get older, they may succumb to tobacco mosaic virus or some disease or whatever. But we'll see if we can get 2 years out of these. We might get a bumper crop this year, you never know. Anyway, that's good for now. Set myself a calendar reminder, I think, to water these at least once a week until spring, when I set the automatic watering system up for everything we're going to grow in here this year. But for now, we'll just leave that open a tiny crack just for airflow. Helps to inhibit mold formation. So the other thing I want to do is pot up one of these capsicum flexuosum plants, and I'm going to take that indoors and grow it on a windowsill. And hopefully a little bit of additional warmth will enable it to grow on a bit. These two here, we'll leave them out here, and we'll try and get some fruit off of these this year, because that's something I haven't tasted before, is this particular variety of, or this particular species of capsicum. But that is going to go into there. I'll put a little bit of slow release pellets in there, not many, just a tiny little sprinkling, just to help it along. And then, yeah, not got much of a root ball, but I'll try and not disturb that. Okay, well, that is capsicum flexuosum. I'll get a label in that so we don't forget what it is. The other two will stay out here, and we'll try and grow them out here. About a week has passed since I planted these Cape gooseberries up here in the upstairs greenhouse. The soil is still moist, but I'm going to give them a bit more water just to make sure they don't die as a result of my neglect, like some of the other things have done. I'll water further out into the border as well, because if they want to put their roots out there, let's give them some reason to go there. Now you might be wondering, why don't I just set up the automatic watering thing instead of set myself a reminder to water these every week? Good question. I'm glad you asked. Reason being, we're not out of the woods yet in terms of getting a frost. It's the middle of February. We might still get some cold enough weather to freeze outside. And my automatic watering system requires that I run a hose across to the house, to the outside tap there. And I don't want to run a hose across the garden if it might freeze solid when it's not flowing. That would be bad. So yeah, for the moment, we'll continue watering these by hand. And hopefully, as the weather warms up, we'll see some more growth on these. And, you know, maybe we'll harvest a decent crop this year. Time for the comment positivity section. You know the deal by now. Just going to focus on some positive and interesting comments. First off was one on my TK Maxx, not budget challenge, my TK Maxx shopping and cooking challenge. This was where I made a snack out of 2 flatbreads with some chickpea butter inside of it and some other things. And then fried it. I would call that second snack a quesadilla. I like that. Nice bit of wordplay there. Always appreciated. Somebody on an old budget challenge on cucumbers. We've noticed a bad cucumber taste too. Bizarrely, if you buy organic, that taste and smell isn't there. I will try that sometime. I'll pick up an organic cucumber. Yeah, I mentioned it quite a few times in videos. About 4 or 5 years ago, cucumbers just suddenly started tasting really horrible to me. I can't eat cucumber anymore. I don't think it was COVID. Timing was a little bit early for it being COVID. But yeah, cucumbers taste like dusty old bookshops smell. Anyway. Right, next one was Longwood, the walk in Longwood. Love this very interesting and diverse video. I'm now 84, but we spent many years holidaying in Dartmouth. We had a lovely apartment and the balcony overlooked the River Dart. I love Brixham, and we have had pasties from that shop. Love the steam train from Kingswear to Paignton. Thank you for bringing back happy memories. That's really nice and lovely to hear. There is something interesting, isn't there, when you see a place that you've been on the screen. It happened to me actually one time. I was watching a video from a channel called Living Walks, which I'll link to in the description and link to in this card as well. Living Walks, they just do unnarrated walks through nature, through cities and places like that. And they did a walk down this street in Granada, in Andalusia, in Spain. And they walked right past the restaurant where I sat and where I did a tiny bit of video celebrating my 25,000 subscriber milestone. And yeah, when I was watching it, I was going, I've been there, I've been in that restaurant, I ate there. Right, anyway, next one. Hi Mike, have you thought of maybe doing some YouTube editing tutorials? I for one would be interested. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I think I can't advise the mainstream YouTube editing because my style, I deliberately don't follow the kind of mainstream YouTube genre type of editing. But yeah, I could do a few little bits about editing. There's a segment earlier in this video actually about my workflow, which somebody else asked about. But yeah, I might do a few little bits on editing. There's more to talk about in that respect actually, because I'm changing the way that I work. But we'll talk about that in a moment. This one's on the subject of can openers. I'll be honest, a couple of years ago, I was in the why would you use a can opener on a pull tab can crowd. But last year, as a little joke, stroke experiment, I pulled a shrimp and used a can opener. And for certain cans, it makes a massive difference. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I've been converted. Less mess, less splashing, fewer injuries. And now I get to answer the same question when someone sees me do it. Well, I feel your pain. Yeah. It's weird, isn't it? That what's weird to me is that people think that just because there's a pull tab on a can, you have to open it that way. You don't. Anyway, next question was on a batch cooking video. Did you just put that snail in your stock pot? So yeah, I found a little snail on a leak, I think. Is that a snail? Anyway, I'm just going to rinse that out. And I said, okay, you can go over there. And I put it in an enamel glazed bowl that was on the side. No, that's not the stock pot. That's the trimmings that go in the compost. So that snail is now hopefully living in the garden and living a happy little snail life in the compost heap. Next one was, next one's really interesting. This is something that happened not in the comments on YouTube, but took place on the Atomic Shrimp Discord server. On the recent video where I went for a walk along the Fleet Lagoon shore, I found a really weird seaweedy thing. It's like a bladder and I didn't know what it was, and it defied my attempts to look it up. I looked up all the different kinds of seaweed, all the different kinds of egg cases and things that it might be, couldn't find a match anywhere. And I went off to Reddit because I thought, okay, well, I'll just post a question on Reddit. There are various subreddits like, what is this thing? So I posted it on what is this thing because I genuinely don't know what it is. And my post got auto-moderated by the Reddit bot saying, you can't post that here because you don't know what it is. No, you need to decide whether it's a plant or an animal, or whether it's maybe an egg case or an insect or a bug or whatever, and then post it in the appropriate subreddit. What is this plant or what is this bug? But the point is, I don't know what that thing is. So I don't even know what phylum it is. Oh, I didn't. So yeah, it could have been an egg case of some sort, in which case animal kingdom. It could have been a seaweed, so plant kingdom. It could have been a fungus of some sort. I just don't know. So I didn't even know. And that's a really interesting thing, isn't it? On Reddit, you can't ask specifically what something is unless you know roughly what it is. Anyway, I bemoaned this fact on the Discord server and said, look, here's the thing. And very swiftly, somebody answered me and said, it's this thing. And it is oyster thief, so called because it was first observed on oyster beds. It's a type of seaweed. It's a brown algae. Oyster thief or bladderweed, Colpominia peregrina. Not native to the British Isles, but has been found here. Native, I think, to the Pacific Ocean, but it's been recorded here for over a century on oyster beds. And there are oyster beds there in the Fleet Lagoon, so I imagine that must have been imported with the oyster stock when they brought the oysters in to start the oyster farm, assuming they didn't just gather them locally, because I think it's Pacific oysters that are farmed there. So when they brought the oysters in, they probably had the spores of the seaweed inside them, and so that's how that got there. So that bladder-like thing I found on the shore of the Fleet Lagoon was bladderweed, which you'd think I would find that on a Google search, but I tried and it just didn't come up. Anyway, thank you for that. That's the thing that happened on the Discord server. On the subject of my recent video about Microsoft's weird upselling, which actually somebody said I prefer to call it upstealing, which I think is fair. So Microsoft put the price up for their 365 product at the same time as pushing in their Copilot AI feature. And it turns out that actually what they've done is they've just upgraded everybody or upsold everybody without asking them. And if you go through the process of cancelling it, you get offered your original price without Copilot. And so that's what I did. Of course, lots of people are quite angry about the fact that I used Microsoft products at all. Which I'm not going to focus on because this is comment positivity, and I don't have time to be as angry as the whole world is about Microsoft. It's just waste of my energy. I would rather stay calm and work the problem. Anyway, so lots and lots of comments from people saying Linux Mint, use Linux Mint, switch to Linux, and use LibreOffice, which is a fair comment, and preaching to the converted. I've still got one Microsoft Windows PC that I use for my video editing the video you're watching. And I thought, okay, well, let's just try and switch that last PC to Linux. So, for example, this little laptop here, this is an old netbook, which I bought way back. This had Windows XP on it when I bought it. This now runs Bunsen Labs Linux. And I use that just for audio recording because it's quiet and I can plug the microphone into it and record directly to that. The little thin client thing there. Behind me runs another different version of Bunsen Labs Linux, actually, but again, a Linux distro there. My laptop, which was an HP Envy that had Windows on it when I bought it, I installed Ubuntu Mate on it, and I was using that right up until I broke it, trying to replace the hinge. HP stands for hinge problem on laptops. I was trying to replace the hinge, which entails replacing the whole of the lid. And everything was going well up until the point where I tried to snap the screen back into it and I applied pressure unevenly and things broke. So that laptop's no longer usable. The front glass broke, just the digitizer, I think. But anyway, that was a huge sidetrack, wasn't it? Okay, so I've got one PC. I'm looking at it over here. It's not in camera view. That I still run Windows on because I edit my videos on it. And I edit my videos on DaVinci Resolve. Now, DaVinci Resolve does have a Linux version for it, but it's targeted for video professionals, and so they expect you to run it on Red Hat Linux, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and they expect you to run it on a workstation that's only used for video editing, nothing else. And so DaVinci Blackmagic Design provide an image that you can just install, and it has all of the dependencies in it, and it just does a bare metal install onto the machine and sets up Rocky Linux, which is the free version of, which is like replaced CentOS, which is an offshoot of Red Hat. But anyway, so you can do that, but I can't do that because the installer just assumes it needs to wipe all of the hard drives on the machine and install itself on using the whole of the disks. I wanted to run it dual boot alongside Windows just to make sure I get things working before I, make sure you know where you're going to land before you jump. The alternative is to try to install Linux dual boot with Windows still in place, which in theory is fine, and the Linux part of it went fine, but getting DaVinci Resolve to work on Linux was a real headache. Here are my notes from what happened over the last 2 weeks of attempting this. There are numerous tutorials out there of people saying, here's how to get DaVinci Resolve working on Rocky Linux, on Linux Mint, on Ubuntu, on Fedora, all sorts of things. I've tried them all. I must have done in the last 2 weeks about probably a dozen different abortive Linux installs where I wiped a partition, installed Linux to it, got all of my dependencies in place, tried to install DaVinci Resolve, and it just failed for one reason or another, which I couldn't resolve. Anyway, so yeah, I tried installing Rocky Linux 9, which is the latest version, and installing DaVinci Resolve natively on it. It mostly goes okay, but then DaVinci Resolve just doesn't run properly. There was no sound, and the rendered output video was like really choppy and had horizontal tearing on it. So that was just a mess. Tried again with Rocky Linux 8.6, which is the officially supported version by Blackmagic Design, but even though it's quite old, actually it's not the most current version of Rocky Linux. And in that case, I just couldn't resolve all of the dependencies that DaVinci Resolve needed to run, partly because where Rocky Linux 8.6 is so old, some of the repositories that you'd have to call on for the extra dependencies for DaVinci Resolve just don't exist anymore. They've been taken down. They've been superseded, and they're now for different versions of that family of Linuxes. So then I tried installing more user-friendly Linux, such as Ubuntu or Linux Mint, and then I set up a DistroBox container so that I could put using Docker, and then put Rocky Linux inside that container, so that when DaVinci Resolve runs, it thinks it's running on Rocky Linux, but it's actually inside of a container in, it's not quite a VM, but it's more like a translation layer or something, really, for anyway, containerized stuff. But again, I couldn't even get the installer to run in this case. It said it went to 100%, but it actually did nothing. And again, I think because it was just failing to find specific dependencies that are in repositories that have been discontinued. So then I tried installing natively on Mint and on Ubuntu 3 different times. I got the installer to run, and the program seemed to work, but it wasn't very stable. It just crashed sometimes, just out of the, nothing. There was no sound in the edit preview, although that turns out to be a license problem with a particular sound codecs. But also, it just wouldn't even render videos. When I tried to render an output video, it just sat there doing nothing, and just hung and crashed. So then what did we do? We tried installing natively on Fedora. It failed on Fedora 40 or 41 because the Resolve installer is looking for specifically versioned dependencies, which have been superseded in Fedora 40 and 41. So I tried Fedora 39, which has the right named dependencies, except those dependencies again aren't available because the repositories have been shut down, because they're out of date, they're out of support. So that didn't work. And this is the problem I found, actually. A lot of the tutorials that you find out there is people saying, I got it working. But when you look, those tutorials are 2 years old. So that was somebody managing to do it at that point in time with DaVinci Resolve and those named version dependencies then. Everything's moved on since then, except DaVinci Resolve. The development cycle for Linux is not brisk. And so, unfortunately, they still want you to run it on an old version of Linux, but you can't, because you can't fully install an old version of Linux unless you use their DVD image and wipe your whole machine, which I didn't want to do. So yeah, I did have a look at the official installer from Blackmagic Design, which is a DVD image, an ISO image, so you can boot from that, and it gives you a menu that starts off and says, okay, do you want to do automatic install? This will wipe every disk you've got and install things. And I couldn't even just take some of the disks out of that machine because I wanted to dual boot on the main SSD. So I couldn't do that without wiping Windows. There is a manual install option, but it went into a proper old school manual Linux install. You know, not like your installer that you get for Ubuntu or Linux Mint or any really, really up-to-date distro. It was one of those kind of old school Linux installers where you have to know what you're doing. And so you go off to say, okay, where do you want to install it? And it doesn't just want you to point it at a partition. It wants you to specify how big the swap partition is going to be and what the mount point is, and you know, all of these things, which I have done before. I was a trained Linux admin 15 years ago, so I once knew how to do that. I think that's probably all fallen out of my head since then. But anyway, so I spent 2 working weeks of time that I should have been spending making these videos trying to get DaVinci Resolve working on Linux and failing. So I kind of felt like I tried hard enough. It would be nice to step away from Windows because actually the performance of most things on Linux is better, I find, on the same hardware than it is on Windows, because Windows is a bit bloaty these days. Some people might think that's a bit of an understatement. The short version of all of that is that the manufacturers, the publishers of DaVinci Resolve, Blackmagic Design, assume that their product, DaVinci Resolve, is going to be used on a dedicated workstation that's built with the reference platform for VFX, so using Red Hat or Rocky Linux or CentOS. And it's going to be a dedicated platform that does that and nothing else. So it's not going to be a desktop PC that also does email and web browsing and, you know, whatever else that ordinary plebs like myself do with a desktop PC. They are a company of video professionals. You can't expect any less than that from them, but it is interesting. They give their software away to desktop users, I think as a kind of gateway drug to get people hooked on that and then try and feed them into the whole ecosystem, and so that they buy the Blackmagic hardware, which is where they make their real money. But anyway, I can't fault them for doing it their way. It is the professional VFX workstation way, but it's very hard to deal with that from an amateur perspective, at least on Linux. On Windows or Mac, you just click through the installer and it works. It's a shame it isn't quite so simple on Linux. However, actually, at the end of all of this, I don't like giving up, so I thought I'll have one more go. And I have actually now succeeded in installing DaVinci Resolve on Linux Mint natively, not in a container or anything like that. Natively, managed to get something. There was a very, very useful web page with a script that actually would do translation for all of the dependencies. So DaVinci Resolve installer was asking for specific versions of dependencies. There's a script, I'll link to the web page actually because I'm tremendously grateful for it. There was a script that unpacks all of that and links it to the kind of current versions of those dependencies, and it worked. And it worked except for one or two things. The most common audio codec, AAC, which is the audio inside of a typical MP4 file from a camera, is not supported in DaVinci Resolve on Linux, and so I still need to find a work. I still need to convert all of my footage coming in before I can edit it on DaVinci Resolve on Linux. So you might be thinking, okay, well, why not just switch away from DaVinci Resolve? It is a good question, but I've invested a lot of effort in developing the skills to run that software and learning that platform. I just don't fancy jumping on a different learning curve right now. But also, what would be the alternative? Even kind of the best video editing software for Linux, which is probably Kdenlive, really capable and feature-rich software, but when you compare it to DaVinci Resolve, it is sadly a long way behind the feature set and the capabilities of DaVinci Resolve. So there isn't a better solution to switch to unless you go to Adobe Premiere, and we're trying to get away from subscriptions and paying money to big evil corporations, aren't we? Anyway, just to kind of reiterate, I'm not a Linux noob. Like I say, I was trained on Linux admin on Novell SUSE about 15 years ago. I've probably still got the paper certificate somewhere, but a lot of that's fallen out of my head. And also Linux isn't the same thing that it used to be way back then. It's a lot easier now. And I would still say for the majority of desktop users, if all you use your computer for is things like web browsing, document editing, perhaps a little bit of image editing, games maybe. I think there's a Steam client for Linux. So there's a lot of the common things that people do in Windows. Really, really easy to switch over to one of the friendly distributions like Ubuntu or Linux Mint, more popular distributions of Linux. It's when it comes down to very, very specialized stuff like DaVinci Resolve, which is not only a specialized application, but it's also a very complex application. So it's doing lots of different things. It's layering graphics on top of each other. It needs all these different libraries to do the things it does. And so if anything's going to go wrong, it's going to be a complex, specialized, niche type of bit of software like that. And unfortunately, that's what I found. But I think we might be coming out of the woods. I think there'll be a separate video on my journey from Windows to Linux with DaVinci Resolve, because it's a whole thing. Anyway, moving on. Hi Mike, have you considered visiting Worth Matravers? It's just up the coast from Chesil and very interesting. Drive through the... No. This is directions on how to get it. From there you can also visit Winspit Quarry, which is where they filmed Doctor Who. It's the home of the Daleks, Scarrow. They also filmed Blake 7 there, as well as Star Wars The Mandalorian. Carrying on past the quarry is the Dancing Ledge, and the round trip takes you past the dinosaur footprints, which are also very interesting. I'm confident you'll enjoy. That does sound like something I would enjoy. Thank you so much for that. Kind of right on my doorstep as well, so we'll get down there sometime to Worth Matravers and Winspit Quarry, and we'll have a little tour of that, and I'll take you along with me. And then just to finish off, sometimes I get comments that make me feel like perhaps I'm not the world's biggest weirdo. Here's one of those. So this is on an old video about Marmite. Somebody said, I love a dab of Marmite with hot milk. Stir till milk is light brown. I mean, a hot milky Marmite drink. Well, as weird as that sounds, and I can't imagine that being nice, I have to try it. So off we go to the kitchen now, and we're going to have hot milky Marmite. Oh, here we go. Okay, so we've got our Marmite, we've got some milk. I think we'll make this a small cup. And now we'll head over to the stove and warm that up. Now here's the thing, I'm aware somebody might be trolling me here, so don't get any ideas in thinking you can just suggest any old nonsense in the comments and I'll jump and try it. I'm not going to be a puppet for trolling like that. Anyway, this one came out of the blue. We'll give it a try. I can't imagine this is going to be nice though. But yeah, my curiosity has piqued and we're going to give it a fair shot. We're not going to boil this. It's just coming up to temperature now. We'll just get it up to same kind of heat you'd have for maybe cocoa or something. Okay. Warmed milk into the cup. Marmite. And this is the real deal. This is not your supermarket own brand. Now I'm not quite sure how much we're going to need here. So I'm going to assume that it's maybe well, we'll start I think with a third of a teaspoonful there. That seems about the right amount to make the milk a light brown colour. And there it goes. Well, that's not light brown yet. That's more of a pale beige. So I think we might need a bit more Marmite in there. Now I don't want to put the milk spoon back into the Marmite jar. So we'll have another. Okay, so that's not quite a level teaspoonful of Marmite in there. That is, I'm not quite sure how well that's coming across on camera, but that's light brown, dark beige. Here we go. What am I doing with my life? Here's mud in your eye, or whatever they say. That is supremely weird. Okay, I will try and describe the taste to you here. Firstly, obviously you can taste the Marmite. You can taste the yeast extract. It's a kind of, if you don't know what Marmite tastes like, it's a bit like the flavour of stock cubes or bouillon cubes. It's salty, savoury, almost meaty. So you can taste that in there. The milk, it's made the milk taste really creamy. I don't know why. I don't know if that's just because the salt in it is making my taste buds, making me salivate and making my taste buds work more effectively. It's terribly strange, but not terrible. I think actually what it reminds me of, it tastes like a really, really creamy, milky gravy. And I suppose that should be obvious. But there you go. Hot milky Marmite. I'm not sure I ever want to drink that again, but I don't hate it. And I'm glad I tried it. So thanks for that suggestion. And thank you for watching. I hope to see you again soon.